Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back in lecture number 27. Our today's topic is about the Islamic banking in Pakistan, how it evolved, how it started, and what is its recent status. So before we discuss the details, let me remind you what did we study in our previous lecture. It was about Takaful, one of the very important subjects in Islamic financial system. It is the substitute of insurance system because we know that in conventional insurance, we don't have the Sharia approval because it is not Sharia compliant. Because we discussed some reasons that why it is not Sharia compliant. One of the main reasons was that it is only an exchange of money. For example, the policyholders, they deposit premiums and in reward they get cash. They deposit cash, they get cash. One of the mechanism that cash against cash, these transactions, they are not allowed under Islamic economic system. And then there was concept of gharar, uncertainty, gambling, and there were so many other things which we can associate which were immoral. So we have devised the insurance system in Islam which we know as Takaful. Takaful is the word derived from kafala, which means guaranteeing each other, and it is based on the concept that we should help each other in good things. Being the part of a society, we should take care of each other and to establish such institutions where the participants, they can help each other. It is permissible in Sharia. And we discussed some operations of Takaful, how it operates, that how people, they get together and they pool a fund, they contribute funds, and according to the volume of their contribution, they can compensate against their losses. And also the uses of Takaful, that how it can be used in the properties, in the family insurances, and how it covers different aspects of our life. And then there were some Takaful modes which were quite important and quite interesting, that the Takaful operators, how they operate this Takaful system. And there were three modes we discussed as Wakala model, Mudarba model, and a hybrid model which was a hybrid of Wakala and Mudarba. And then we discussed some Takaful types and documents. Those documents, they were simply as an example, just to make you familiar that what are the contents of those agreements. But it is not part of your exam, in fact. It is only to make you familiar with the real-time documents. Now first, let me discuss the Wakala model. Wakala, as it is clear, it is derived from the word wakil or agent. So whoever is the operator, whoever operates this Takaful system, they can charge their fee. So that fee will be known as this model will be known as Wakala model. And the fee can also be charged for the fund management and also performance incentive fee. So different types of fee can be charged, but normally administrative fee is charged. And let me remind you that Takaful operators and insurance companies, they are two different things. In insurance companies, shareholders, they are the owners of the company, whereas in a Takaful company, the participants, they are the owners of this company. Takaful operators, they just perform the managerial kind of duties. They are the subsidiaries of some other companies. Like we had the example that Dawood Group, they have one of their companies known as Dawood Takaful company. So that Dawood Takaful is an operator of this Takaful operations. So they charge a fee if it is a Wakala model, and they share in profits as well if it is a Mudarba model, and if it is a hybrid of two, they charge a fee as well as they share in the profits from the investments. So under Wakala model, contributions, they are received from the participants. A pool of fund which is created for Wakala model, here the participants, those who pay premiums into such type of insurance arrangements, their contribution is divided into two parts. One goes as a fee. The contribution is divided into two parts, one of which is the Wakala fee, and the other one goes to Tabarruk contribution, or what we know as Waqf account as well. In Pakistani perspective, sometimes Waqf is also used and Tabarru is also used. So the Wakala fee in this case we assumed, for example, it is 30% and 70% goes to the Tabarru contribution. So this Wakala fee, in fact, from it goes to the shareholders fund, to the parent company. But it should be understood that in the meanwhile, all types of administrative expenses will be deducted from it. Now keep in mind that the Wakala fee is the share of the shareholder, that is the owners of that company. But in the meanwhile, the expenses will be deducted from here, like all types of administrative expenses or any expenses which we can relate here. And then the 70% of that contribution which was given or which was deposited into the Tabarru fund or a Waqf fund or a charity fund or a donation fund. So here this fund is transferred to the General Takaful Fund, and this fund is invested into some businesses because it is unwise to leave the funds as it is. Rather than it should be invested somewhere to earn some profits into it and to increase the volume or increase the balance of this General Takaful Fund. So from here, the investments are made by the Takaful operators and profits are generated from these investments. There can be losses, there can be profits, but normally the highly professional operators, they invest these funds into profitable investments, and the profits are derived and they are deposited back into the General Takaful Fund. So the volume of General Takaful Fund keep on increasing with the addition of profits which are earned out of these funds. And then these funds are used to compensate any type of losses. For example, what will be the figure that we can minus from here? So the expenses of Takaful related to the General Takaful Fund will be deducted from here, and then in case of any event that the loss occurs and the participants, they should be compensated for their claims. So those claims, they are paid out of this General Takaful Fund, and Reet Kaful arrangements are also arranged from this fund. Expenses of Reet Kaful, they are paid out of this General Takaful Fund. So any expenses that we can relate to the cancellation of such policies, they will be also deducted from this General Takaful Fund, and then a balance will be kept in the reserve. And after that, if something is left, so we have to fill a reserve. If that reserve is filled, and after that if some balance is left, that we know as net surplus. So this surplus, it can be gifted back to the contributors, or it can be donated, or it can be used by any charitable purpose. So this is the Wakala model. Now what's the difference between Wakala and Mudarba model? That in Wakala model, the operator, they charge a fee, whereas in Mudarba model, all the funds which are contributed by the participants, those funds, they are invested by the operators and they generate profits with these funds. So those profits, they are shared between the fund and the Takaful operators. So this is known as the Mudarba model. So in this case, you can see here that the contributions received by the participants, they are divided into two parts, but not in the fee and the Takaful Fund. Rather, it is divided into kind of deposit account, which we know as the participants account, and then participants special account. What we can call it as the Tabarru Fund as well. We can call it as the Waqf Fund as well. And here, the participant, what's the logic of this participant account? Because this is just like an account into any bank. It's kind of a deposit account where the depositors, they can withdraw at any time. So this operates just like a deposit account into the Islamic financial institution. So here, what's the logic to create a participant's account? The idea is that because this is a Mudarba model, so here the Takaful operator, they might need some more capital. To increase the volume of the capital, the premiums received by the clients, they are supposed to be a higher amount, a bigger amount. So if it is a bigger amount, there can be an incentive for the contributor that a part of the contribution will go into his or her own deposit account, and that account will actually increase the fund which the Takaful operator will use to invest into any business. So you can see here, if the policies they are received, if the premiums are received by the contributors only in the participant special account or the tabarru account, the volume is quite small. But if we add the participants account as well, the volume of fund which is available for investment is quite big here. So to make the volume available to some particular level, the concept of participants account was also introduced into it. So this fund is invested by the takaful operator and the profits are generated out of it, and the profits they are shared between the takaful operator and this takaful fund, the participants account and the Waqf account. So here suppose the profit sharing ratio is 30% for the takaful operator and 70% for the funds which were created by the takaful operators. And another thing that we should keep in mind, that this 70% of the profit, it will not go only into the participants account, but it will be divided proportionately into the participants account and participants special account. If it is 60% and this account is 40%, then this share of profit will be divided into 60% and 40% in the respective accounts. And the nature of withdrawals or the deductions will also be different. So as we knew that in the participant special account, which is a tabarru account or a Waqf account from which the losses will be compensated, the things that we deduct, they are almost similar as we saw in the previous model. The claims, the re-takaful expenses or any other expenses that we can associate with such type of funds will be deducted from participant special account, and a balance will be kept in the reserve account, and if something is more than the reserve requirement, then a surplus will be distributed either to the participants or it can be used for any charitable purpose with the consent of the participants. And whereas the participant's personal account, which is just like any deposit account into any bank, so it will be treated differently. There can be withdrawals by the participants. If there is my account into the in any takaful operator, with any takaful operator, I can withdraw at any time, and then if the participant dies, in that case whatever balance is into the personal account of that deceased person, that will be given back to the descendants. And then if somebody surrenders the policy and quits from this takaful system, then again the share of that person into his or her account will also be paid back. And also at the time of maturity, if the takaful was for 5 years, 6 years or 10 years, so when that time period expires, at that time whatever balance is there into the participant's account, that will be paid back to the participant along with any profits due on that account. So this arrangement is known as the Mudarba model. So here the takaful operator, they have a facility that they can use the takaful funds that was deposited by the contributors, and they can derive profits from themselves. So they have a relationship of a mudarib and the capital provider. Now the capital provider, as we know that there are two types of capital: participant's personal account and participant's special account. So the profits will also be distributed respectively. And then the next model, which is a hybrid of the two, which is wakala and mudarba, we have both arrangements into one contract. So this model shows that contributions, they are divided into participants special account and participants personal account. Just like in case of mudarba, the contributions, they are divided into two accounts, personal and Waqf account. And then out of these funds, because this is a hybrid of wakala and mudarba, a wakala fee will be deducted first. So here from the participant's special account, a fee will be deducted, not from the participant's personal account, because this is their own account and it is only given, or it is only deposited to increase the fund. This is not for the takaful operator to deduct their expenses. So here the wakala fee will be deducted. As you can see here, the wakala fee is deducted and it goes to the shareholders fund, and it should be understood that before it goes to the shareholders fund, the expenses in the meanwhile will be deducted out of it. And then the remaining account the remaining balance will be invested along with participants' personal account. So the funds from both of these accounts, they will be invested by the Takaful operator, and profits or losses will be generated out of it. So then profits or income, it will be shared between in the three heads. One is the shareholder, the operator, the other one which goes to the participant's personal account, and the third one which goes to the participant's special account. So the profits derived out in the hybrid model, they are divided into the Takaful operator, then the participant's account and participant's special account. And then from the participant's special account, all the claims will be compensated out of it. Just like the previous models, like in case of Wakala and Mudarba model, the expenses of claims, the Takaful, the reserve, it will be deducted out of this participant's special account. And if something is left after keeping certain amount in the reserve, so that surplus in this case will go back to the participant special account. It means that participant special account keeps on increasing, but the other arrangements can also be introduced here with the consent of the policyholders or the participants, that surplus beyond a certain reserve limit, it can be gifted back to the participants or it can be used for any charitable purpose. And then again, participants account is treated just like any deposit account. So here the participant can withdraw at any time, and at the time of maturity will be paid back to the participant, and at the time of surrender the balance will be paid back to the participant. For example, if 4 installments or 4 contributions have been paid, whereas the total contributions they were 10, so the amount equivalent to the 4 contributions is the balance of the contributor. So that balance will be paid back to the contributor at the time of surrender. Now we come towards today's topic, that was the evolution of Islamic banking system in Pakistan. So after this lecture you will be able to understand the concept of Islamic banking in Pakistan, social and political background of Pakistan, that how Islamic banking is important for Pakistan, and if the present system is catering the needs of the society. So we will look into the social and political background and the history of Islamic banking in Pakistan and Islamic banking operations in Pakistan, then some facts and figures which we have derived from the quarterly bulletin of State Bank of Pakistan, which are published and every 3 months, and they are available at the website of State Bank of Pakistan. So you can go to the website and you can share a lot of information from that website. First of all, Islamic banking in Pakistan, how it evolved. And the background is that most of the Muslim countries, particularly in the subcontinent, in the Middle East, they were colonized by the Western countries, and also in the East Asia like Indonesia, Malaysia. So almost all of the Muslim world, it was colonized by the colonial powers. And Pakistan, India, it was colonized by the British Empire. And at that time, the conventional banking system, it prospered in almost all the Muslim world. So then the local population was reluctant to use the services of those banks in the beginning, but with the passage of time they got used to it, and at this time, without these banking services, our trading activities, our business activities, our commercial and financial activities, they are not possible. So the banking system, it has become so important into our lives. And contrary to the Sharia requirements, commercial banks were established and kept on expanding their businesses and network in the country. Because we inherited this system from the colonial powers, they were not Muslim, and they evolved the banking system according to their requirements, and it was not Sharia compliant, because in the Sharia, interest is not allowed, whereas this banking system operates all around the interest-based banking. So here, there is a need that we should adjust the banking system, or we should correct the banking system, and we should replace the banking system with Sharia compliant banking system. So in Pakistan, according to the World Fact Book, about 190 million people, actually more than 190 million people, they live in Pakistan, out of which 96.4% they are Muslim, and 33.6% they are non-Muslim. So here is a majority is the Muslim. So we need a system which is Sharia compliant. And variety of ethnic groups with different language, culture and history, they live here. We have different ethnic groups, different languages. For example, in Pakistan, if we look in the provinces, we have different ethnic groups living in Pakistan, and we have different cultures as well. And the only thing that we share is the religion and Urdu, the language, the national language. So because we share the same religion, so that's why we need a Sharia compliant business, and all the banking operations and all the operations into this country should be according to the Sharia, or any business or any activity should not be against the concept of Sharia. And before partition, the British ruled the area and took the power from the then ruling Muslim rulers. Because of this reason, Muslims were the victim of the British government and were kept away from many opportunities like education, trade and economic activities. So this is natural that the colonial powers, when they came into subcontinent, and they took power from the Muslim rulers. So the resistance was also from the Muslims more than any other ethnic group or any other religious group. So that's why they kept Muslims away from many activities. And the same example is in the case of Malaysia, that the Malay Muslims, they were kept away from the cities, and they were kept away from many opportunities, and many immigrants, they were invited into Malaysia. And now we see that there is an ethnic mix of Chinese, the Indians and the Malays. So what I want to establish here is that the people who were ruling at the time the colonial powers came into this region, they were the enemy number one for these colonial powers, and they were intentionally kept away from many of the opportunities. So the opportunities would mean the education, the trade and other economic activities. And at the time of partition, literacy rate was very low in Pakistan because the Muslims particularly, they were kept away from many opportunities, and Muslims themselves, they were reluctant to enjoy or to contribute into such activities like to study in the schools of those colonial powers and to engage into business activities with those colonial powers. So they themselves, they kept away from them, and also those colonial powers, they forced them away from these activities. So that's why at the time of partition, literacy rate was very low, and most of the population, they were residing in countryside, in villages. So almost 82.7% of the population in Pakistan, they were not living in cities, they were living in the countryside. And this division, that only small group was living in the cities, and out of those, the people who could trade and who were near to those colonial power or the rulers at that time, they could flourish. They were educated, they could be able to engage into trading activities, into economic activities, and only few families, they became very rich. And moreover, the system itself, like the capitalistic system, it concentrated the wealth into few hands. So a small number of elite is controlling the nation's wealth, and the state, 22 families, they owned 66% of the industrial wealth and controlled 87% of the assets of the banking and insurance companies, according to Dr. Mahbub al-Haq. And he wrote a report or a research, according to his research in April 1968, a small elite was controlling the wealth of the nation. And at the same time, corruption in Pakistan is all-time high. So according to the previous year's reports, the corruption in Pakistan is widespread, particularly in the government and lower level of police forces. So these reports, they were published by the Transparency International, and we have some glimpse of that report. The country has had a consistently poor ranking at the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, with score of 2.5 in 2011, 2.3 in 2010, and 2.5 in 2009 out of 10. In 2011, Pakistan ranked 134 on the index, with 42 countries ranking worse. So, and then in 2012, Pakistan's ranking dropped even further from 134 to 139. making Pakistan the 34th most corrupt country in the world, tied with Azerbaijan, Kenya, Nepal, and Nigeria. And the corruption is estimated to be at least 500 billion rupees annually, which amounts to 90% of the budget. Some liberal estimates give the figure of 1,500 billion rupees, which is 75% of the GDP. According to Professor Khurshid Ahmed, he wrote his article in 1998, and he says that the liberal estimates, they are even higher, not 500 billion rupees, rather 1,500 billion rupees. And according to the calculations performed by the Transparency International, Pakistan has lost an unbelievably high amount, more than rupees 8.5 trillion or 94 US billion dollars in corruption, tax evasion, and bad governance during the last 4 years of Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani. Actually, this report was published in the previous year, in the start of the previous year, and during the first 4 years of the previous government, about 94 billion US dollars they were used, or they were lost in the corruption, tax evasion, and in the bad governance. And again, it is mentioned into that report that one of the advisors of Transparency International acknowledged that Pakistan doesn't need even a single penny from the outside world if it effectively checks the menace of corruption and ensures good governance. Meaning that if we can control the corruption, then maybe we don't need even a single penny as an aid or loan from the outside world. And the Transparency International also noted that the 4 years of the present regime under Gilani had been the worst in terms of corruption and bad governance in the country's history. Chairman Naib Admiral Fasi Bukhari last year, he declared that corruption to the tune of 40 billion US dollars was being done annually in the country. So at this huge volume of corruption, the countries they don't prosper. So we need to control this corruption and the menace of this corruption, and it has so far-reaching effects that countries that don't prosper, the countries can't make any progress. And as a consequence, it is highly required to implement an economic system that can take care of the deprivations. And consequently, few attempts were made to share the economic wealth among the nations, like Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's nationalization during the 70s and Ziaul Haq during 80s. And now the State Bank is assigned the responsibility to provide Islamic financial system in the country, because the wealth was concentrated in few families, in few hands. So the Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, he tried to nationalize the economy, the different companies and the firms. It was an attempt to distribute the wealth of the nation among the people. And then in the 80s, Ziaul Haq, he also tried. And now the State Bank has been assigned the duty to transform the system towards the Islamic financial system. And Council of Islamic Ideology was appointed the task to prepare a draft of interest-free economy in 1977. So the serious efforts, they in fact started in the 70s, when the Council of Islamic Ideology, what we know as the Islami Nazariyati Council, they were assigned the task to transform the economy into the Islamic economic system, and they were assigned the duty in 1977. And after about 2 years, in February 1979, President announced that interest will be removed from the economy in a period of 3 years. At the first step, House Building Finance Corporation, National Investment Trust, and Mutual Fund Investment Corporation, they were selected for the removal of interest in their operations. So these 3 corporations, they were selected to at the first step that their operations will be interest free. For example, House Building Finance Corporation will finance the people to construct their houses without any interest. Rather, they will arrange some partnership and they will derive their benefits in the form of rents. And then Council of Islamic Ideology, when they were assigned the task to remove the interest from the economy, they advised reduction of dependence on interest-bearing foreign loans, as it was not possible to eliminate interest in it, techniques of profit and loss sharing, and Qarz Hasana. Because the foreign loans, they are only interest-bearing loans. So the Council of Islamic Ideology, they advised that those foreign loans, first of all, they should be stopped, and we should reduce the dependence on these foreign loans, because we can't get those foreign loans in the form of Qarz-e Hasana or on the partnership basis, like for the profit and loss sharing basis. And then in 1981, government ordered banks to establish separate counters for deposit on profit and loss sharing basis, and it continued till June 1985. So almost 4 years this practice continued, that along with the savings account, which was the interest bearing accounts, profit and loss sharing accounts, they were also created in the banks, and separate counters they were established for this purpose. The idea behind that was that these deposits which were received on the basis of profit and loss sharing mode, those deposits will only be used in some Sharia compliant modes. The further loaning or lending of those funds was not allowed. Rather, those funds would be invested into certain profit generating activities, and if there is profit, it will be shared with the depositors, and if there is a loss, that loss will also be the burden of the depositors. And the government announced the discontinuation of the parallel system from July 1985. And then in July 1985, and this practice continued until 1985, until the government announced that the interest bearing and non-interest bearing, that is the profit and loss sharing accounts, they both are allowed to invest into the debt bearing, the interest bearing debt securities. So this was a setback, and this movement towards the interest free economy suffered this setback. And in August 1985, so until July 1985, almost 4 years, this practice of separate counter for the profit and loss sharing account was continued. And then in August 1985, the government allowed the banks to invest their profit and loss sharing deposits as well into the interest bearing government securities. So it means that those profit and loss sharing accounts, they were no more profit and loss sharing accounts. They were just like any interest bearing deposit the banks they were managing at that time. And then in 1991, the Federal Sharia Council declared the procedure adopted by the banks in 1985 as un-Islamic, because that discontinuation of the profit and loss sharing account in a separate counters, that was declared as the discontinuation of separate counters for profit and loss sharing accounts. It was declared as unlawful or against the Sharia by the Federal Sharia Council in 1985. And in response to this declaration by the Federal Sharia Court, some of the banks and the government, they appealed in the Sharia Appellate Bench of the Supreme Court of Pakistan. And then in 1999, the Sharia Appellate Bench of Supreme Court rejected the appeals and directed all laws on interest banking to be seized. And the Sharia Appellate Bench also ordered the government to seize all the interest-bearing activities, and the government set up, and after that, government set up high-level commissions, task forces, some committees to institute and to promote Islamic banking on a parallel basis with the conventional banking system. Although it was half-hearted steps that some committees, some other arrangements, they were taken up, but it was very, very slow process. And it was such a slow process that even till today, the Islamic banking, almost after 14-15 years, it is still about 10% of the total total banking industry in the Pakistan. And in 2004, the State Bank of Pakistan established a dedicated Islamic banking department and established a Sharia board to regulate and approve guidelines for the emerging Islamic banking industry. Because the Islamic banks, they have started emerging nowadays, and accordingly, the State Bank of Pakistan, they have they have regulations for them, and to facilitate their transactions and their operations, a dedicated Islamic banking department has been established in the State Bank of Pakistan. And now let me show you some glimpse of Islamic banking facts in Pakistan at this moment. So this is all these informations, they are derived from the quarterly bulletin of the reports issued by the State Bank of Pakistan. You can go to the website of State Bank of Pakistan, and there are so many interesting information available, and you can check some details about the Islamic banks as well. and particularly one of the report which is named as Islamic Banking Review. It has been published from the year 2003 to 2007. It is quite interesting, and I will advise you to study that report as well. So at this moment, as of June 30, 2013, because this quarterly report was available for September, it will be published soon. And we have about 5 banks. We have 5 banks in Pakistan which are purely Islamic banks. They claim that they are Islamic banks. One of them is Al Baraka Bank. The next one is Bank Islami Pakistan Limited. Then Burj Bank Limited, Dubai Islamic Bank Pakistan Limited, and Mizan Bank Pakistan Limited. So Mizan Bank being the pioneer in this banking, Islamic banking system, they have more branches than any other Islamic bank. The number 2 is Dubai Islamic Bank, and then number 3 is Al Baraka Bank Pakistan Limited. So these are the Islamic banks. They are operating about 668 branches in Pakistan. And if we look at the Islamic branches of the conventional banks, because the State Bank, they allowed the conventional banks also to establish the Islamic banking branches, the independent Islamic bank branches of different banks. You can see here that the maximum number of branches they have been established by Bank Al Falah. It is 113, and after that Askari Bank Limited, then Faisal Bank Limited, Habib Bank Limited, the MCB Bank, and Bank of Khyber. They have maximum number of Islamic banking branches in Pakistan. Others, they have quite limited number of branches in Pakistan. And these are the bigger banks. They are operating in Pakistan like UBL, MCB, HBL. So these banks, they are quite famous, and they are running more number of Islamic bank branches in Pakistan than other banks. And then there are sub branches which are being operated by different banks like Al Baraka Bank, they have 2. Then Askari Bank, they have 2. Bank Islami, they have most number of sub branches operating in Pakistan, and in total we have 68 sub branches. So if we add them all, the number of branches operated by Islamic banks, then number of Islamic banking branches operated by the conventional banks, and then the sub branches, in total we have 1,115 banks branches operating in Pakistan. Now let me show you the distribution of these branches into different parts of Pakistan. First of all, let's look into the areas of Sindh. That we have the Karachi city operating 308, and after that Hyderabad, the second largest city. Then we have Sakhar. So you can see here the concentration of Islamic bank branches, that is in the big cities. So these are only the big cities. And then for the smaller cities in the countryside, we don't have any branches for the Islamic banks. It means that the facilities of the Islamic banking operations, they are available to the people living in the cities, not for the people living in the countryside. And nowadays State Bank is forcing the banks to operate in the countryside as well. But still you can see here the concentration of Islamic banking branches, they are only in the big cities. And then look into Punjab. Lahore is the biggest city, and it has 174 branches. Then we have Faisalabad, Gujranwala, and like that we have Multan, Rawalpindi, and these are the big cities. And others, some industrial cities like Sialkot, and we have Gujarat. These cities, they are quite big, and the industrial activities, they are also big. Trading and commercial activities, they are more than any other part in Punjab. And it also shows that the concentration of Islamic banks, they are in the big cities. It means in the countryside their presence is negligible, or there is not they don't have any presence at all in the countryside. And if we look at the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, we have 45 branches in Peshawar. Then Abbottabad has 12. Others, they have very few number of branches, like in Masdehra, 12. So other cities, they are very small, and then they don't target the customers residing in the countryside. And the same pattern we can see in the Gilgit-Baltistan, that in Diamir we have 3 branches and Gilgit we have 1. And in Khyber Agency you can see here 1 only, and in Orakzai Agency only 3 in the areas of FATA. And then in Islamabad we have 58. So these are the number of branches and the concentration of these branches in different parts of Pakistan. And in Balochistan, as you can see, Quetta is the biggest city and they have maximum number of branches. Other cities, they have minimum number of branches. And same way in Azad Kashmir, in Mirpur and Muzaffarabad, the bigger cities, they have Islamic banking branches only. In other parts of Azad Kashmir, we don't see Islamic banks operating in the other parts. Now keep that point that presence of Islamic banks is mostly concentrated in big cities. And now let me show you some glimpse of their financial positions, that the industry progress and market share of Islamic banks at this moment, that as of 30th of June 2013, we have total assets of all the Islamic banking industry in Pakistan, 711 billions. Probably 71.1 billion. The figure was missing here, as it has been normally written that rupees in million or billions. Let me suppose this is in billions, and this is the volume of amounts as of June 12, March 13 and June 13. And likewise deposits. One phenomena you can see here, that it is they are all growing. Assets, they are growing, the deposits, they are increasing, and net financing and investment activities, they are also increasing. And the total Islamic banking institutions, they have increased from 17 to 19. That is, the Islamic banks and the conventional banks which are offering Islamic banking services, those number of banks have increased from 17 to 19. And the data has been derived from the quarterly unaudited accounts, and these facts and figures, they are mentioned in the quarterly bulletin published by the State Bank of Pakistan. And then the year-on-year growth, we can see here the assets, they are growing at a pace of 26.9% for the Islamic banks, which is quite phenomenal growth. And in March 2013, the growth was 31.5%, but it declined a little bit in June 2013. It is 27%, but still it is a growth. The deposits, they are growing phenomenally, but there is a declining trend. We can see here that from June 2012, it was 33.3%, and June 2013, it has declined to 28%. But still, it is a phenomenal growth. And then net financing and investment activities, it increased until March 2013, and then in the next quarter, it decreased a little bit. And the share in the industry, we can see here, in June 2012, the share in the assets, it was 8.2%, and it is gaining momentum all the time. And you can see here in June 2013, it has reached to 9%, and now it is about 10% at this moment. And the deposits, they are also increasing, 8.9%, then 9.7%, then 9.9%. And net financing activities, they are also at a rise. But for this quarter, there was a slight decrease, but still there is an increasing trend we can see in all these figures. And the investment activities, if we can see the investment of the Islamic banking funds into different operations, we can see here the federal government securities. The investment is also increasing. The year-on-year increase and then quarterly increase you can see here. And for the fully paid up ordinary shares, the investment is again at some increasing balance, at some increasing pace. We can see year-on-year growth of 4.8%, but there is a slight decrease in the last quarter, that is 2.5% decrease in the investment in the ordinary shares. And likewise in the term finance certificates, debentures, bonds and PTCs, You can see the level of investment, and mostly there is an increasing trend. And we can see something fishy here, like these investments, in fact, they carry interest on them. And the Islamic banks, they are investing into such type of securities and they are earning interest onto it, which is against the theory and practice. So this practice is against the theory. So we see that the operations, they are questionable, but still there are some Sharia boards for each and every bank, and there might be some justifications that these securities, they have some assets in their back. For example, these securities might be kind of skook securities where the underlying asset is there, but if that is not the case, then investment into such securities which carry interest onto it is objectionable, and this is a big controversy. And that investment into securities has different types. For example, there are certain securities which are held for trading, that the banks, they purchase them and then they sell them. For example, the business of shares, the price appreciation is always there. So if the price appreciates, the Islamic banks will sell those securities, and sometimes the securities, they are held to maturity. For example, in this case, you can see here, these are the securities which are held to maturity, and these are the volume of securities which are available for sale with the Islamic banks, and these are the surplus on revaluation. It is either surplus or a deficit. So we can see a surplus in June 2012, then in March 2013 there is the increase in the amount, and then there is a slight decrease. So we can see here year on year growth is 77.5%, whereas in the last quarter we have seen a negative trend, the deficit of 90.3%. That is a decrease in these securities. And these are the figures of net investment into different types of securities. And now keep in mind, first of all, the concentration of Islamic banks is in the big cities, and the second is that the Islamic banks, they are also investing into securities which might carry interest into it, and most probably these securities, they have interest factor into it. Particularly when we talk of the federal government securities, then term finance certificates or debentures, these are particularly the debt securities, and they have interest income on them. And then if we look at the financing mix, what kind of activities, what kind of modes the Islamic banks, they offer for financing, we have studied them all, like Murabaha, which is a sale mode, then Ijara, which is a lease mode, then Musharaka, Mudarba, and diminishing Musharaka, which are the participatory modes, and then we have studied Salam and Istisna mode, and also Qarde Hasana, and some others. So these are different modes where Islamic banks, they finance different activities. Now let me show you the concentration of financing in different activities. So Murabaha has maximum investment. The Murabaha financing gets maximum share in the investment. You can see that it is always increasing. And the second one is Ijara, and then is the diminishing Musharaka. So these three activities, they are getting maximum financing from the Islamic banking institutions. And after that, Salam and Istisna. And if we look at the other activities, which are the participatory modes, like Musharaka and Mudarba. So you can see here a very small financing is available in the Musharaka and Mudarba mode of financing. So what's the reason behind that? So as we know that these are the participatory modes. So in participatory modes, a business or a venture is conducted with with these funds, along with the partnership from the clients or any other parties. So the risk of business is always higher. So the Islamic banks, they are avoiding risk here. So this is again a controversy from the theory. Theory suggests that Islamic banks should participate into the risk-based modes, and it is suggested in some literature that initially Islamic banks may invest into other activities like Murabaha, Salam, Istisna, Ijara, but gradually they should increase their financing in Musharaka and Mudarba. Whereas we can see here the financing of Islamic banks is highly concentrated in Murabaha, Ijara and diminishing musharaka. Diminishing musharaka, which is again a participatory mode, but in this case risk is minimum. So Islamic banks, they are investing in all those activities where risk is not there, and they are avoiding such activities where risk is there. So you can see the percentage that 40% of the financing activities in Murabaha, then 11% in Ijara, and 35% is in diminishing musharaka. So if we see the total, almost 86% of the financing is in only 3 modes, and then Salam and Istisna, they have the next number, and other activities they have 3.2%, whereas Musharaka and Mudarba, they have financing total of, in the mix. In the total financing mix, their share is less than even 1.5%. So you can see here at the last available figures, it was about 1.7%, so less than 2%. So which is against the spirit of Islamic banking. And then let me go to the next slide, which is the financing concentration in different sectors. So we can see the Islamic banks, they are negotiating, they are dealing with different sectors in the industry, that like chemical, pharmaceutical, agribusiness, textile, cement, sugar. But normally they don't engage with these businesses on participatory modes of financing. They engage in these businesses with the Murabaha, Salam, Istisna and diminishing musharaka modes. And this is the client-wise financing portfolio of the Islamic banks. Corporate sector has the maximum share, that is 70%, and it remains about 70% in the past 2 to 3 quarters. And in the small and medium enterprises, they have very small amount available for these sectors, whereas Islamic financial industry, I think that it is particularly designed for the facilities of the small and medium enterprises, and they should invest heavily in the small and medium enterprises along with the corporate sector, because the risk with corporate sector is lesser, whereas risk in the small and medium enterprises and the businesses established quite new is higher. So where the risk is higher, we can see here the financing is least in case of Islamic banks. And then likewise you can see the potential of agriculture sector in Pakistan is quite high, but still the investment is quite minimum. And the consumer financing has a share of more than 10%. It means there are the facilities of Ijara, particularly car Ijara, that is designed for the consumers. Again, the risk is very minimum in this case. So the Islamic banks, they again sponsor such type of financing. And then there are commodity financing, we can see here, and then stock financing and others. So we can derive certain results that first of all their presence is in the big cities. They don't have their representation in the countryside. The second suspicious thing was that they have invested into interest-bearing securities. They were issued by the governments or other parties. And then in the third place, we saw that in the financing mix, they mostly finance such activities which are least risky. And then non-performing financing and assets. So here we see the performance of Islamic banks is quite better. If we go to the next slide, which has compared it with the industrial average as well. So the figures in this slide, they show the non-performing financing and assets. So we can see here the non-performing financing, the substandard financing and doubtful financing, and these figures, they are of the loss. So you can see the substandard financing, it is decreasing or quite minimum. And then the doubtful financing, it has also very small amounts. And then in the losses, we can see here, these are the amounts of losses, and these are the provisions against these losses. So these are the balances which are supposed that there may be some losses, and these provisions are maintained with the banks. So the non-performing assets or financing doesn't mean that the Islamic finance or the banks the Islamic financial institutions or the banks, they don't do any efforts to recover such amounts. There are certain activities, there are legal processes, and litigation procedure is always there. So these amounts, they are recovered, but sometime the time is required there. Sometimes they don't recover anything, but normally they recover something out of it. And the recoveries, we can see that year to date there are certain amounts which have been recovered. And then net performing non-performing assets, these are the non-performing assets. The growth is 12% and quarterly growth is only 0.8%. And the net non-performing assets, they are 7.9 billion rupees, 8.1, 7.8, and there is a decreasing trend into it. It means the Islamic financial institutions, they are quite careful in their investments, in their evaluation procedure for their clients. So that's why their non-performing assets and their non-performing financing, if we compare with the industry, is quite good. They have quite minimum percentages or quite small amounts as non-performing financing and assets as compared to the industry averages. And in this slide we can see the breakup of deposits into different heads, like the fixed deposits, saving deposits, current accounts, remunerative and non-remunerative, and likewise from the institutions, the deposits in their remunerative deposits and non-remunerative deposits. And in currency wise, we can see here in the local currency and in the foreign currency, and there is an increasing trend we can observe, except in the non-remunerative deposits, where there is a decrease of 72.2%. And otherwise there is an increasing trend, the figures, they are positive. So Islamic banking industry, it is expanding all the time. That's why at this moment it has reached to a level of 10% in the total banking industry. And this is the earning and profitability ratios of the Islamic banks or their branches. And we can see here net income to total asset 1.4%, then in the March 13.8%, 0.8%, and whereas the industry average is 1.1%. So they are quite comparable, not very far behind them or not very far ahead of them. And then return on equity, we can see it is again streamlined with the industry average. And net markup income to gross income, again there are not huge differences, but still it is towards the better side. And non-markup income to gross income, you can see here it is below the industry average. So the Islamic banks, they need to improve in this section. And trading and forex gains or losses to gross income, this ratio is again quite less than the industry, because there can be certain reasons that Islamic banks, they are not allowed to certain avenues where they can generate more revenues or more income. Maybe those avenues, they are not Sharia compliant, so that's why the avenues are limited for the Islamic banks, and there might be the justification for that. And operating expenses to gross income, Islamic banks, they are better than the industry average. And personal expense to operating expense, again they are in line and towards the better side. And spread between financing and deposit rates, it is more than the industry. And these figures, they show that Islamic banking industry is quite competitive and they are competing in the market. So this was all about our today's lecture. In this lecture we discussed some details of evolution of Islamic banking in Pakistan, and also some facts and figures that were derived from the quarterly bulletin of the Islamic banks from the website of State Bank of Pakistan. And now you can, by yourself, you can check the annual growth of the assets, the finances, and the annual financing mix, and what is the pattern of Islamic banks year on year. So these things you can monitor by yourself. You can go to the websites. There are different data sources available. You can visit the websites of the banks, and you can go to the State Bank of Pakistan, and you can see the annual performance of these banks, and you can compare them with the conventional banks as well. So that's all for today. Inshallah, see you in the next lecture. Till then, Assalamu Alaikum.